Hey everyone, welcome to episode 0 of Tuesday Tips. People have been asking me to put out tips and tricks videos for as long as I can remember, and I think this is a good way to go ahead and do that on a weekly basis. So the format of this is going to be one video every single week for at least 33 weeks in 2017. It's going to be 10 weeks of beginner tips, followed by beginner walkthrough solves, 10 weeks intermediate, followed by intermediate walkthrough solves, and then 10 weeks of advanced and advanced walkthrough solves. After those 33 weeks, I'll probably put out a little more content with maybe some super advanced tricks or whatever people kind of been saying they want in the descriptions. So go ahead and comment on the video if you have any other ideas on what I should put out. When I say, I guess a little more in depth about the series, when I say beginner tips, I mean beginner tips means tips that everyone at any stage can be using in their solves. More advanced solvers will probably have figured these out already, but they certainly will be, if you haven't been using them, you definitely need to start. They'll be pretty much applicable on every solve you do, and anyone can start using them. Intermediate tips will be a little more specific. They'll be geared toward cubers who are a little more experienced. Beginner cubers will usually not find these as useful, as they're for more specific scenarios, and their time will usually be best spent on more general improvements. Same thing goes for advanced tips. Intermediate cubers might not think they're as useful, and they should probably focus on more intermediate steps, but they're still useful when the cases do arise. So I definitely recommend kind of checking out all the videos so you can kind of see how what things you can improve on in the future or currently. Also, when I say beginner, I usually mean plus 2 minutes on 5x5, 4 minutes on 6x6, and 6 minutes on 7. Intermediate would be about 120, 240, and 4 minutes, and then expert would be about 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 3 minutes on 7x7. These tips and tricks will be mostly geared toward my main events, 5, 6, and 7, which are pretty much all solved very similarly. Sometimes I might have a tip that will also be able to be used on 4x4. However, I don't think I'm going to be putting out any 4x4 specific tips. Some of the big Q tips might just also be applicable here. So since this is episode 0 of Tuesday Tips, I'm not going to give a specific tip, but more of kind of how to apply these tips in order to make yourself a better solver. So kind of to talk about practicing and how to get better, I kind of think practicing can be divided up into two different kind of categories of how people get faster. There's kind of knowledge and kind of skills involved in solving the cube, and then there's the mastery of those knowledge and skills. To give a good example of this is kind of when you switched from layer by layer to learning F2L. The actual kind of switch where you learn the knowledge of F2L, you learn that this method is far superior, it can be faster. That pickup of the knowledge of switching to F2L is kind of the knowledge part of, I now know how to be faster, I just can't do it yet. The part where you practice for weeks and weeks in order to make F2L actually superior is the mastery. If you're like me and many others, initially when you switch to F2L, you're probably a little slower, you weren't used to F2L, and doing an inferior yet more comfortable method like layer by layer was a little faster. This is just because you hadn't really mastered F2L or gotten to a point where your mastery of F2L is enough to where it's faster than layer by layer. In cubing in general, whenever you switch to something new, a lot of times it's going to take a little bit of time just to get used to implementing that and kind of getting it smoothly into your solves. During that time, you're probably going to have experienced a little bit of a slowdown. Another good example is learning full PLL. Initially, when you learn full PLL, learning the algorithms is kind of the knowledge there, and then being able to recognize and execute them quickly and with very little reaction time is the mastery. Like when I learned full PLL, I learned them all, so I knew them all. However, I was slower because I'd look at it, it'd take me a few seconds just to identify the algorithm, the finger tricks weren't kind of there yet, it would take me another few seconds to execute it. I might have been able to actually do the two-step algorithms much faster than the single one-look PLL. However, after a few months and a bunch of mastery later, full PLL is obviously much faster. Yeah. So for more advanced tricks, the mastery stage is going to take much longer, and the kind of slowdown because of picking up new knowledge is probably going to be less. However, so these things won't be as pronounced. However, it's still going to be a similar phenomenon. I'd recommend that you don't pick up kind of new techniques and new styles right before big competitions that you care a lot about. If you heard people say like don't learn algorithms at competitions, it kind of goes along in that kind of line of thinking. You don't learn algorithms at competitions because if you just learn the algorithm and you get up onto the competition and you get the case, you might not be able to recall it, you might not execute it correctly. It could actually slow you down in that instance. However, over the long term, learning the algorithm so you execute it properly is much, much, much better. This is why I recommend learning new kind of tips and tricks or incorporating new things into your speed solving much before competitions or before only not around competitions that you really care about. For myself, I try to spend at least 1 or 2 months before kind of worlds or national competitions not learning anything new or changing my cubing style, because I don't want to go into a big competition not being comfortable with how I'm solving. I take 1 or 2 months just to kind of master the skills that I picked up over the last year and make sure that every solve feels comfortable while I'm competing. Right now, I guess since it's at the start of the new year and Worlds isn't for 6 to 7 months, I guess I'm in the kind of like building knowledge phase. I'm not afraid to stop during my solves and kind of figure out what's a better way to do something. I might not be faster right now, but after mastery, it will certainly come into effect. To give an example of this, here's something that I've been working on recently is kind of, if you do last 4 edges on 6x6, there's many different ways you can do these, but one thing I've been noticing is that I'm very inefficient at these last 4 edges. So if I was in my kind of like final stages right before big worlds competitions, I wouldn't be focusing on kind of changing how I do last 4 edges. I do exactly the same to be as fast as possible with what I know. However, since we're months away from a big competition and I have time to sit and practice, I'm not afraid, and you shouldn't be either, to kind of stop during a solve. If you see a case that you've done 100 times and you think every time you get it, man, this could be done better, when you get it the next time, you should just stop. Don't care about what time you get. Just stop the solve and kind of look and kind of figure out a faster way to do the case. So in my example, I would see in 6x6, it's not uncommon to see a case where you have these 2 edges here and these 2 edges here. And you could do pretty basic flip and solve. However, that's not very efficient. I thought since you're flipping and solving and you're only solving one set, I feel like you can do a little more. And that's really quite true. So there's much more detail involved in these last 4 edges, but just to kind of show you a brief overview, instead of doing a flip or a slice, flip, and slice back, you can do a cycle, which solves this edge, and then you can pair up the 2 middles on this edge as well at the same time without any more time, but you accomplish 2 things at once. That's a really good example of kind of what stopping at a case and kind of figuring a better way can help you out. In terms of the tips and tricks videos, I'll give you a lot of different cases where this is useful. Don't be afraid to stop, see the case, remember the trick, and then do it. It might be slower in that particular instance, but if you do it 100 times, it's going to be faster very quickly. Especially for newer cubers, in all honesty, your first competition, don't be like your first few competitions in your first year or two. If you're anything like me, you're going to be shooting for much, much higher goals, and your first 2 competitions, you're getting faster at such a quick rate that you really don't need to worry about kind of honing your skills at those competitions at all. You can spend your first few years completely just learning as much as you can and always being in the stage of kind of learning new stuff and not kind of being fully developed in terms of what you know. That's perfectly fine, especially as a new cuber. I wouldn't really recommend kind of honing your skills and not changing your style at all for a few months building up to a big competition. I wouldn't recommend that until you're kind of competing to make finals at a big national or kind of trying to like podium at a local. That's kind of where I'm assuming a lot of people would want to be eventually, and really working towards that goal. You'll get there the fastest if you always try and grow in what you know, and algorithm sets and kind of more tips continuously through competitions. Another example, I'll just kind of give one more example here, is that I'd always see on 7x7 patterns where there's a lot of 2x1 pieces kind of already made, and I think, wow, I feel like it'd be very easy just to fill in these other 2 bars. And if you're not used to this is incredibly difficult. It's actually one of the harder 7x7 and 6x6 center building techniques, which I'll have a full video on later. But I'd see this for a while, I'd think, wow, there must be a better way, and I'd stop, I'd figure out, oh, you can build the 2x1s and you can finish the edge in a much faster way, like so you get this 2x5 block. This recognition is very difficult. It takes a lot of time, thousands of solves to really kind of master. But initially when I started, I was slower, but after thousands of solves, I've gotten very used to it, and I'm much better at this. And it's one of the reasons why my centers are so fast, is because I can adapt to all the different ways to do centers. So, in summary, pretty much don't be afraid to like incorporate new things into your solves, even if it's going to make you slower, like in the current solve. Don't be afraid to stop if you see a case you know can be better, or you see a case where you know there's a trick for it, you're just not used to it yet. Don't be afraid to stop the timer and do the case slowly, because you do that a few times, you can do the case kind of okay, you can figure it through, and then you're doing the case, which is much better without even thinking about it, and your cubing is going to be much faster overall. If you are someone competing at big nationals, or you really care about this one specific tournament, I would recommend taking a week to 2 months, just honing in on what you know and not thinking about any new stuff whatsoever, in order to kind of have the perfect performance at that one time. However, I would only recommend this like for once or twice a year, no more than that, as it will kind of impede your overall progression. So yeah, tune in next week for the first real episode of Tuesday Tips.